flights in the immediate future are dry desert has been very fortunately blessed with nice large rain.
In 1966, the United States found itself in an accelerating war in Vietnam. Don Wayne and chief photographer Chuck Upthegrove went to the battle zone to report personally on the war and on the Dayton area GIs who were fighting it.
Doctor, can you give us a little more detailed information on your medevac flights on the helicopters? It sounds most interesting.
Well, Mr. Wayne, what it basically is a rescue mission for the Marines or, excuse me, Vietnamese soldiers or civilians who have been wounded on the ground.
We received briefings by the State Department that the conflict in Vietnam was simply to stop the spread of communism. That was the State Department's line. And when we arrived in Vietnam, it didn't take us long to ascertain that the South Vietnamese Army was not fighting. It was all Americans doing the fighting. And it was not based on strategy from the Defense Department on how to counteract guerrilla warfare. And we could easily tell by the time we left Vietnam, this conflict was not going well at all for the Americans.
And Don Wayne covered national politics for the Dayton area. He scooped the networks in interviews with presidential candidate Ronald Reagan and President Gerald Ford, who told Don about changes he had in mind for national desegregation efforts. When Daytonian Steve Lauterbach and his colleagues were finally released from Iran after 444 days in captivity, Wayne and Upthegrove had already been in West Germany for 2 weeks, ready to cover the return to freedom.
So eventually we got the news that on a specific date, the hostages would arrive and their arrival would be 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, the time difference there and doing a story, feeding back by film, was a great difference. So you couldn't go to bed and go to sleep. You had to stay awake and cover the story, write the story, and feed it by satellite or ship it back by plane.
A year later, Don Wayne was in Washington to interview Vice President George Bush. He was on the spot to give Miami Valley viewers a live report via satellite from our Washington bureau on the ill-fated Air Florida Flight 90, which plunged into the Potomac River. Don Wayne did have an uncanny knack for being at the center of the day's news. The events he covered are the substance of much of our lives, and the people he worked with still seem like old friends. Friends and reflections ahead when we return.